So joining me now is a terrific panel, supersized, if you will, Eugene Scott, national political reporter for the Washington Post. He's fresh from the campaign trail, is my NBC News colleague, Dasha Burns. We got Democratic strategist, Xochitl, Hinojosa, and Republican strategist and former White House political director, Sara Fagen. Eugene, what I find interesting is that you can make a case both parties are actually succeeding on the issues they're trying to succeed on, and we're just not sure where the country's going to go.
Right, and that's why so many people focus on independent voters, because these are voters who are looking at things a little more nuanced, aren't really falling in line with party lines. And that's been the trend for a while when you look at independent voters. And whether or not Democrats or Republicans are going to be successful in winning those independent votes, I think it's going to depend on which states and which elections we're talking about.
Dasha, does it really depend, do you feel as if it depends on the geographic area you're covering on whether you hear more about some of these, democracy or abortion rights versus cost of living and crime?
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, I'm hearing about both of them a lot. I wouldn't have said this in the primaries, but right now I will. I think it's now a politics of policy rather than a politics of personality. Just a few months ago, it was really, especially looking at Pennsylvania.
It was all about the guys.
Right. It was
Betterment and Oz or whatever, yeah.
Right. And now people are like, no, these are the issues we care about, and that's what's driving us to the polls. And I will say, I think the abortion rights issue, look, it shook the ground for a lot of people. And I'm not talking about just Democrats. I am talking about independents. And you hear that when Democrats are using this language that is very clearly trying to reach those voters. They're talking about it as a government overreach issue, as a freedom issue. In Kansas, the first sort of big flag here that this was going to be critical, the group fighting for abortion rights was called Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. You wouldn't think that that's a group of Democrats, but it was.
Sara, our pollsters said something interesting as we were getting ready for our poll that we're going to debut on Sunday, which is like, it's not that, let's not talk about waves. We have cross currents, right? And we may have some unusual results, but it may not actually be easy to explain in like one typical sentence that we're used to.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some evidence that suggests that there's the red wave is going to be, much smaller than people thought.
You still want to believe there's a wave? You're still there?
I think that there could be. I mean, look, you have to look back at 50 years of history and the fact that the economy has played such a dominant role in elections. And if I was on this show earlier in the week, I may have been a little bit more boisterous about Democrats' ability to thwart that. But I think that inflation number that was released yesterday really was a punch in the gut to Democrats' chances. I also think, candidly, Donald Trump has been a little less in the news the last week. And I think August was a tough month for polling for Republicans. It sure seems to have rebounded last week in what I'm seeing.
Xochitl, what's your take?
I think that Republicans could have walked away with the Senate. I don't think so anymore. I think in many of these primaries, you saw Trumpism, and Trumpism does not win you independent voters in some of these key battleground states that Joe Biden won. You're also seeing President Biden's approval rating tick up, and I think that is because he is addressing some of the issues that people care about, like inflation, like gas prices.
But all of the increases are just among Democrats.
They are among Democrats, but at the same time, Democrats actually have some real accomplishments that they can now show for and talk about, which they are talking about. I also think that in some of these states, Democrats are trusted compared to Republicans. These are people that are well known in the state that have established themselves versus a Republican candidate that seems to be more Trump-like than anything else.
Ask this, is there new information that could matter? We had one piece of new information you pointed out there. What do you guys think, Eugene? Is there a new piece of information we don't know? Right now, some could say maybe it's an indictment of Trump. I think now that we know that's going to be, if it happens post-election, given what we have with the special master, maybe it's your energy bill that comes in October. You know what I mean? What's an unknown that we don't know yet?
Investigations, maybe local news doing investigation on candidates. To your point earlier, a lot of these Republican candidates are unknowns, people who aren't very familiar to their electorates. And so now you're seeing some vetting that didn't happen before that could, make some independent voters say, this is not the person that I want to, take this position.
Right. And some of these Republican candidates that are farther right are not the candidates that the establishment invested in, right? So there wasn't as much vetting. And I think between abortion and these the MAGA outcome from the primary, that is creating some challenges. challenges for the Republican Party. And I do think we could see more than one October surprise with some of these candidates. Even in the primary, the January 6th photos coming out from Kathy Barnett, we could see more of that sort of the social media scrubbing, all of that rising to the surface in the coming months.
Chuck, I think the one thing that I question is there a paradigm shift happening based on, sort of where political science has been? And that we're in a place now where both parties are so unpopular. Right. We've had 7 out of 8 change elections in a row. This will be in
4 straight midterms, right? I mean, which, by the way, we'd never had 4 straight midterms where we had flips before.
Right. Yeah. And in the last 4, hundreds of House seats at the state legislative jurisdiction moving. So I do wonder if that people are so fed up with politics. Yeah. Democrats think they have a good chance. Republicans think they have a good chance. The reality is people don't like either party, unfortunately.
It's funny. There's this one voter anecdote from the Times piece that sort of, it was a woman from Racine, Wisconsin, and she's like, she's had to skip vacations. She's changed her lifestyle. She's driving less. She's not going to the movies. She thinks Democrats are handing out too many government subsidies, and she's voting for Democrats because of abortion. Right? Now, how many of those voters exist, right? If we know the answer to that, you would be able to tell me what the midterms are going to be like, right?
Exactly. And because Roe happened in June, I do think it will mobilize our base and it'll mobilize independent voters. We obviously saw that in Kansas as well. But the reality is how many will turn out because of that issue and how many will turn out for Democrats. And if Democrats don't actually spend the money to turn these folks out and make real investments in some of these communities, then they won't. Then they will stay home like they did in Texas, and that seat flipped from blue to red in the Latino community.
Sara, what would you tell a candidate to do on abortion right now? Because a lot of them have decided to ignore it. Don't touch it at all. And I've talked to some that say, ignoring it's a bad idea.
I think the thing to do, which is always the thing to do on every issue, is to say what you believe, and then.
I know that's crazy. What a crazy notion.
But more importantly, and then try to persuade people on it, because people will vote for you if they don't agree with you on an issue, if they think you're authentic,
if you're genuine about it,
and you have enough other issues that they agree with you on. Of course, the partisans are going to support their team, but look. Here's one of the things about the Lindsey Graham bill, which I know. Definitely goes against anything Republicans have thought about this issue, which it belongs at the state level. That I think could have been a positive, if it got off the ground, is that the debate right now that we're having is all about banning abortion. And the reality is in most of these cases that are popping up in the states, it's a 15-week ban, it's a 16-week ban, it's a 12-week ban, it's a 21-week ban. That was the law in a lot of states before this. So. The situation in Kansas was just the status quo, which was, another version of, a point in which after there was viability, you couldn't have an abortion. And so Republicans do need to have a debate about what does the third trimester look like, because that's an area where they win on this issue.
Eugene, the other thing that there's been some, are the Republicans talking enough about what they're going to do if they get control? And is that holding them back?
That's been one of the biggest criticisms of Republicans when it comes to the inflation issue. I mean, especially if you look at some of the, more conservative MAGA Republicans who are saying Biden is doing this, Biden is doing that, Democrats, your housing, your rent and your groceries, your gas, but they haven't put forward legislation or ideas or just policies that say this is going to improve your situation if you vote for us. And that is something I think voters are paying attention to.
Dasha, what does Oz say he wants to do when he gets elected?
That's a great question. He's talking to the points that the Republican Party has put out there. I mean, talking about crime, talking about the economy. Concrete policy, though, I think is still a real question mark. And, it's interesting. I was in New Hampshire this week covering the primary there, and I was talking to voters as they were coming out. I was asking who they were voting for, but I was also asking them about the future of the party, right? Do you want it to go more toward the MAGA side of things? Do you want it to go back to moderate Republicanism? And how much of a role does Trump still play? And I was surprised by how many people who voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020 said, you know what? I think it's time to move on. Yeah. I think maybe we look at a DeSantis, and I think you're starting to see some Republican candidates now. I mean,
we've been here before.
We've been here before.
We've been here before. In fact, we got one of the interesting things in our poll coming on Sunday is, here we go again. Is this really the beginning of the end? We'll see, right, with him. Like it's like he's in one of these lows, and it's like, is this the moment that he never doesn't recover? Again, we've all been. Let me end with immigration. And do you believe, I'm going to ask each of you this, do you believe there is a section of persuadable voters where the immigration issue hurts you? And then same question from the other perspective.
I think immigration is not a top issue for battleground voters. It is a top issue for your far right and for the Republican base. I think that Democrats, the scenes right now of dropping people off and the Trump-like tactics and stunts, I do think that ends up showing the contrast between Republicans and Democrats, that Democrats, you know,
what about the fact
reasonable.
that a Democratic mayor of El Paso is doing this?
I think that if you are talking to a lot of border mayors, what they will tell you is we need more funding for this. And it's not Joe Biden's fault. It is Congress's fault. They need to act and do something about it. And so as long as we see a Joe Biden and a White House that is aggressively doing that contrast like they have in the last 24 hours, instead of hiding from the issue of immigration, then we will be fine on immigration.
Sarah, the polling suggests that immigration's not, it's certainly a concern of persuadable voters, but it's never their top concern. Those that it's the top concern are sort of already in your camp.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. You know, the one, thing that I think does cross current and helps Republicans to the degree if they do it thoughtfully and appropriately is that we've seen crime go up in so many of these cities. And when immigration gets linked to crime for voters, I think that is a place where, in my view, if it's done tactfully and appropriately, that it does, people will look at a Republican and say, you're stronger. I'm worried about this. This can be part of a challenge with some immigration.
Let me ask you guys this very quickly. If you're Greg Abbott, are you happy that Ron DeSantis did what he did? Or are you like, oh, he just made it a little harder for me?
As a Texan, I would say he is probably very annoyed right now.
What would you say?
Look, I don't know that he is for it or against it. I mean, it was something Texas did. So
no, and I understand. Abbott has been sending him to New York and D.C., and you can make a case. Well, maybe they wanted to go to New York or D.C. I'm just wondering, did DeSantis turn it into a stunt, and it's not what Abbott wanted?
Yeah, I think. Look, at the end of the day, the country's policy, because of this administration, is that there is an open border, and these governors, I think, have every right to consider sharing responsibility around the country.
Well, are we going to see that, by the way? Because DHS wants to do this. DHS wants to start taking over these flights.
Well, I think what you'll see is that right now there needs to be an asylum system, and that there's a difference. There is not an open border. There are people trying to seek asylum, and they're trying to come up with a process to do that.
I will tell you, though, for voters, in New Hampshire could not be farther from the U.S.-Mexico border. It is the issue I heard over and over again. And I think
in a Republican party.
But I think it could be the abortion of the Republicans when you're talking about an issue that could turn people out. People get fired up about this.
I think it's on. And New Hampshire has always been red hot on the right on immigration.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.